At this time, the grade 4 and 5s can be dismissed. All right, well, good morning to you all on my least favorite day of the year. Anybody else tracking with me here? Okay, there's a few of you. It's tough, man, that extra hour, but it is a beautiful day out there, and we're really glad that you're here worshiping with us today. If you have ever been in a crowd, there is a chance that you've come across a sign. In fact, a very specific sign. It's not as common today as it used to be, but you can often find someone that has a sign with a Bible verse on it. You ever seen it? It's John 3:16. It's the same sign all the time. And maybe you've seen this. Maybe you've seen this sign and you have no idea what it's about. Maybe you've seen this sign and you're kind of wondering, I don't know why they keep putting this up. Or maybe, if you've been in church for a little while, when you see this reference, you automatically think to that verse that you've memorized. Because this is one of the most famous verses in our Bible. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." So the reason that this is such a popular verse is because it's all there. It explains this big picture of what God's doing in the world. You see God's love, you see the role of Jesus, you see our needed response, and you see God's promise all wrapped into one neat little verse. And so it's not surprising that we see this on signs. But how helpful is it actually? If you were hoping to share what it meant to be a follower of Jesus, is this the verse that you would use? Is this the verse that Jesus would use if he was teaching a crowd? Of course, we don't really know the answer to that, and John 3:16 is famous for a reason, but I can tell you that often when the crowds got bigger around Jesus, when people, sort of pushed in and wanted to be and hear what he was saying and be in his presence, his message seemed to get more difficult, not easier. And this is fascinating because Jesus wasn't looking for a following. He was looking for followers. And this is something that I think is so important for us to understand because there's a difference between the two. There's a difference between a following and followers. And to be honest, I think that oftentimes the church, generally speaking, the Big C church, can get this wrong pretty easily sometimes. This year we've been focusing on this idea of living intentionally. And it's the final area of commitment from our larger strategic plan that we've been focused on over the last 5 years. And unless you're new here, you probably know and you can recite with me that we want everyone at Compass Point to be so impacted by their relationship with Jesus Christ that they are what? Compelled to live differently. This is something that we talk about a lot. We've talked about this idea of loving our family and leaning into our faith and leveraging our leaders. And then this year we talked about living intentionally. And living intentionally is important because most of our lives are lived outside of this building. Most of what we do happens, Monday to Friday at our workplaces, in our families, in our, whatever our circles of influence are. And what we've been talking about is that sitting back and just leaving your faith to Sundays is just not an option. That's not the kind of church that we want to be. Once we've heard this good news, once we understand what Jesus has done in our lives, it does something to us. In fact, I would say that it must do something to us. And so we have invited everyone at Compass Point to engage with God's plan to renew this world by becoming intentionally hospitable, selfless, and bold. And so this is where we're going to camp over the next little while because we believe that these three characteristics will help us pay attention to our lives. They'll help us pay attention to the way that we're living out our faith in our community, wherever God has us. And it helps us moving forward in this idea of living differently. And here's the point. You see, nowhere in John 3:16 is there any reference to transformation. Nowhere in John 3:16 do we see what life should look like for us today. You see, I think that if we took an honest look, we might find that we emphasize, along with many other places, emphasize belief. We use, big capital letters with this idea of belief, and then we downplay what it means to follow. We talk about the importance of believing, but we forget about following. And there's a reason that here at our church, when we talk about Christians, when we talk about Christians, we don't actually like to use the word believers. Instead, we describe Christians as followers of Jesus. And this is a difference, and this is important. So how would you describe yourself? Would you describe yourself as a believer or a follower? Perhaps both. I don't know if you've ever seen someone holding a sign like this one. For those of you at home, this is a sign that says Luke 9:23. This is a passage that you would probably never see on a sign, but this verse, perhaps more than any other, actually tells us how to be a follower. So let's take a look. If you've got your Bibles with you today, I want you to open them up, turn them on. We're going to look at Luke chapter 9. So if you've got your Bibles, just get there for it. It'll be the Matthew, Mark, Luke. That's where we're looking in the New Testament. Luke chapter 9. You see, Jesus was well into his ministry by this point. He had gathered a huge group of people who wanted to listen to him and hear what he had to say. But there's a shift in the narrative. What happens right here in Luke chapter 9 is a shift that's actually recorded in three of the Gospels that it moves from Jesus talking in sort of generalities about things to being a little more specific about what's about to happen. So he shared with his followers, his closest followers, you know what, I'm going to Jerusalem and things aren't going to go well for me. Things are not going to go well, and there's going to be suffering, and there's going to be opposition, there's going to be all this stuff, and so the followers of Jesus were like, I'm not into that. Like, let's just Jesus, don't go there. Like, you've got such a following here. Look around you. Look at all the people who are all coming around. And then Jesus, he seems to almost get frustrated by this idea of where his followers are, and so this is where he begins. Because they didn't want to hear about suffering, but Jesus was saying this is what needs to happen. And so here's what he said in verse 23. Then he said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in glory, and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." You see, John 3:16 says that if you believe, then when you die, you will go to heaven. And this is good news, and of course this is true. But here in Luke chapter 9, we learn something else that's important as well. What we learn is that in a sense, the moment that you believe, you die. And this is way harder for us to hear sometimes, and maybe we don't talk about this enough, but there is no belief unless we also choose to follow. In other words, there is no John 3:16 without Luke 9:23. And as I said earlier, as the crowds got bigger and Jesus got more popular, he raised the bar rather than lowering the bar when he described what it meant to follow. And I can tell you, there are few people who would put that on a sign, that Luke 9:23, because following Jesus, even though it's been hard, is always something that we would rather just kind of talk about in generalities. But through history, all the way through history, what we know is that this is not the easy way. Following Jesus is not necessarily a way that is going to make things better, make things great, everything is going to be fine. That's not the way things work. See, it'll always require something of us. So let's look at what Jesus said. In verse 23, he says to them all. In other words, what he's saying here is that he's not just talking to the religious elite. He's not just talking about the people who want to get extra credit. He's not just talking about the goody two-shoes. He's talking about everybody. And so he opens up this statement by saying, any one of you who wants to be a follower of mine. And then he begins. Listen, there are so many people who liked what he had to say. There were thousands of people by this point who were coming to hear him speak, and they were so intrigued. And so Jesus lays down what it's going to take, and then he said to them all in verse 23, he said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." So if you are interested in being a follower, it's actually quite simple. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow. It sounds pretty simple, right? The first thing is denying ourselves. We're in the middle right now of a season called Lent. Lent is a part of the church calendar. It's before Easter. Traditionally, it was 40 days. And it was an opportunity that began at Ash Wednesday, traditionally for people to fast and to pray and to prepare for Easter by giving to the poor and doing some of these different things. But it has been adopted in our culture to the point where it's not uncommon to have people ask you this question: what are you giving up for Lent? Anybody been asked that question before? Anybody thinking about that? You see, for most people, whether they're religious or not, they want to give up things, in this opportunity to kind of say, okay, here's some things, these vices or things that I'm going to give up just for a little while, whether it's social media or whether it's watching Netflix or whether it's watching video games or playing video games or social media, whatever it is. And this might be helpful, but this is not what we see when Jesus is talking about this idea of denying ourselves. He was not saying, say no to yourself every once in a while. The emphasis in the verse is not necessarily on this denying part, that it's just this one thing that we do every once in a while. The emphasis is on ourselves. Deny ourselves. And so what Jesus was saying is not to just say no every once in a while, but to say no to ourselves, period. Not when they're just trying to get something in return. Not just once in a while. Do you see the difference? You see, sometimes when we deny ourselves, we think, okay, you know what? I'm just going to say no to chocolate. This is me denying myself. Or I'm going to say, no to this one thing or this vice or something that's been kind of, taking up space in my life. But Jesus says, listen, as a follower, if you want to be a follower of mine, it begins with saying no to your very self. Listen, there is no room for compartmentalizing. And sometimes we're tempted to say, yeah, you know what, I'll follow Jesus, but don't ask me to forgive that person who hurt me because they don't deserve it. Or you might say, yeah, I'll follow Jesus, but don't ask me to give a percentage of my money because, look, I worked hard for that cash. Or you say, yeah, I'll follow, but don't ask me to for my weekend time, or don't ask me to give up any of the movies I want to watch, or I'm good with Jesus, but just don't get in the way of this little part of me. I read this week about vegetarians who make exceptions. For example, there are people who would say, yes, I'm a vegetarian, but I really like hamburgers. So they become semi-vegetarians. This is actually a thing. I'm not making this up. People who say, I'm committed to being a vegetarian, but I'm going to make a few exceptions. Can you really call yourself a vegetarian? Imagine being a vegetarian, sitting next to someone who is calling themselves a vegetarian and chowing down on a hot dog or a hamburger. I mean, it doesn't feel right. I mean, you got to sort of differentiate yourself, and so they have. In fact, they've actually come up with a new name. They're called flexitarians, and I'm not kidding. But here's the thing: are we flexitarians when it comes to our faith? Listen, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, it's pretty simply, it's this idea of denying ourselves without exception clauses. And what God asks for is 100% commitment, and that is the only way to be actually known as a follower of Him. Denying ourselves means saying yes to Him and no to our own ideas. And listen, I don't want you to be discouraged this morning because I recognize how hard this is. I understand that we don't always get this right. I can tell you that I don't always get this right. This is not easy, but this is our pursuit. I want to challenge the idea that we can do any less than full commitment. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time, or I don't want so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. I have not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here and a branch there. I want the whole tree down. I don't want to drill a tooth or a crown or stop it, but have it out. See, being a follower means saying no to our own ideas, saying no to our own plans in favor of His, but it just doesn't stop there. He goes on, right? He doesn't just say deny yourself. What He says next is take up your cross daily. Now listen, I know we have some marketing people in here. You would probably not be surprised to know that businesses pay a lot of attention to their logos. They pay a lot of attention to the way they present themselves to their clients, to the market. For instance, Coke commercials always want you to see their logo with people who are happy and healthy, with just the right amount of condensation on the bottle and hearing the noise when it opens. The message is that Coke is refreshing. I just read an article recently about Apple products and movies. I don't know if you saw this, but what was being shared is that you can use an iPhone in a movie as long as you don't give it to the bad guy. So when it comes to business, image is absolutely everything. But think for a moment, what is the symbol of Christianity? The symbol of Christianity is a cross. You might say it's a fish. It could be. But primarily it's a cross. And a cross was what? An instrument of torture. It was not exactly the kind of thing that you would want to be associated with, but yet that's exactly what Jesus said. If you want to be a follower, take up this. Take up your cross. Not just once in a while. He said take it up every day. And listen, I think that we want to sanitize this, or at least minimize this, by using this phrase. Have you ever heard someone say, this is the cross I have to bear for all kinds of things? Yeah, we use this, right? This phrase, we say, like if we have a bad knee or a bad boss or there's a weak internet signal, we say, this is my cross I have to bear. But this isn't what Jesus is getting at. We're not talking about minor inconveniences here. It's something bigger. What do we know about crucifixion? Crucifixion, there's several things that we know. It was a symbol of official opposition. Crucifixion was not the cheapest form of execution, and it wasn't the only option that the Romans had. But it was done in cases where the person being executed was being set up as an example. And it was this public official opposition. Along the same line, it was also intended to inflict maximum shame. It was public. It was a spectacle. People were on display. So it was official opposition. It was intended to inflict maximum shame. It was also intended to inflict as much suffering as possible. This was not a quick process. This was a long process. It was meant to hurt. It was meant to be excruciating. And it was. It was slow. And finally, it was opposition. It was shame. It was suffering. But it was also, the end goal was ultimately death. Nothing less. You see, taking up our cross is about opposition, shame, and suffering, and ultimately, at times, even death. And you might be thinking, well, look, that's a little over the top. But this is the imagery that Jesus used. When he saw the crowds coming towards him, this is how he described what a follower would look like. Take this up daily. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, when God calls a person, he bids them come and die. If you look back at verse 24 for a moment, it says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. It's an interesting little phrase that's written there, but saving our life means that we are purposefully avoiding opposition and shame and suffering and death. And in case you haven't figured it out, this is our natural instinct, isn't it? This is hard for us to do. I remember when I was first learning to drive, I was coming off the highway and I dropped something off the dashboard. It kind of slid off as I was coming off the off-ramp. And so I was sort of reaching for it. It's a terrible thing to do, and was kind of slowing down as I was doing that. I didn't recognize that there was a car behind me that was getting really frustrated by the way I was coming off the highway. And so as I pulled onto the street and kind of moving down towards my house, this guy came out, whipped around me, was swerving in and out in front of me, slamming on the brakes, coming behind me, going in front of me. And I'm thinking like, okay, this is crazy. And then I see up ahead of me something that is absolutely filling me with dread. It's a red light. And so the car stops and this guy gets out, and this guy was built like a fridge, giant. He comes right up to the window and he's yelling and he's mad. He's so frustrated. He wants to make sure I know everything I did wrong. And guess what I did? I agreed with everything he said. I said, yep, you're right, my fault. You see, in the moment, I had no interest in pointing out that he was overreacting. I didn't really feel the need to point out that swerving like he was doing was probably a whole lot more dangerous than what I did. In fact, in the moment, truth didn't really matter to me. Survival did. If our goal is avoiding opposition and shame and suffering, even death, then Jesus said, ultimately, in the end, what you're trying to save, you're going to lose. You see, following is about accepting opposition. It's about accepting shame when it comes. It's about allowing suffering to come into our lives when it comes, even to the point of death. And when we pursue that, when we are open and allowing these things to be a part of our lives because of what we believe about God, we find that our lives are actually saved. So he says, deny yourself. He says, take up your cross daily. And then he says, follow me. And this is where the rubber hits the road. See, denying ourselves is about giving up our will, and taking on the cross is about accepting his will, even when it's going to cost us. And so following is about putting all of this into practice. And this is the hard part, because to be honest, a passage like this is not easy, it's not difficult to understand. It's all right there. It's really clear. It's in black and white. But what's hard is for us to put it into practice. So I want you to look over a few verses later, starting in verse 57. Because what we see is what following actually looks like. This is kind of a continuation. Here's what it says in verse 57. As they were walking along the road, a man said to him, that's Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He said to another man, follow me. But the man replied, Lord, let me go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Still another said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. And Jesus said, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Listen, this stuff sounds so severe, but the stakes are high. We're not just being called to believe, we're being called to follow. This is what living intentionally is about. And so these three people are mentioned, and they are all set up as examples of how we get this wrong sometimes when it comes to following. The first person says this. He says, I'm going to follow you anywhere, which sounds good. He says, Jesus, hey, look, you just lead the way, and I'm there. But Jesus responded in a really interesting way. He said, if you come with me, we're not going to places that are safe. If you come with me, we are not going to places that are comfortable. If you come with me, we are not going to have a home. We are not going to have a place to lay our head down at night. And we don't know for sure, but it seems like this person wasn't willing to go there. So my question to you today is, are you prepared to follow Jesus anywhere he leads? Let me ask you it another way. Just take a moment here. Just take a moment here and think about that one place that it's hardest for you to follow Jesus. Think about that one area in life that it is so difficult for you to follow Jesus. Maybe it's when you go into work and you're surrounded by those people who you know have different opinions than you do. Maybe it's when you go into your home and you let your guard down. What Jesus says is, if you want to follow me, what about there? Are you going to follow me there? The second person is actually approached by Jesus, which is fascinating to me. But Jesus says to him, he says, follow me. And this person says, hey, Jesus, yeah, sure, I'll follow you, but just let me go and bury my father. Now, what this man was saying is, I'm going to follow you later. It's not that this guy had just lost his father. He was likely asking Jesus, okay, well, just let me go home, and when my father passes away, then I'm good. I'm all in. I mean, as soon as that happens, I'll come and follow you, and we'll go wherever you want to go. Notice the contrast between this guy and the rest of the disciples. When Jesus came to Matthew, and the tax collector, and he said, follow me, you know what Matthew did? He got up and followed. He dropped everything. When Jesus came to John and Peter and the other fishermen to follow, they just left their boats and they followed after him. And so when he says to this person, he says, follow me, and the guy says, okay, yeah, just give me a second. Are you prepared to follow Jesus anytime, he asks? Anybody hit the snooze button this morning? Especially this morning. Listen, if you are not a morning person, then you know that there's nothing more glorious than another 10 minutes. Just another 10 minutes. But how many of us go through our lives kind of hitting the snooze button? You know what snooze button is in our lives? The snooze button are excuses. There's those excuses where we say, okay, I'm in, I'll follow you, I'll get serious with my faith, but let me just get through this relationship first. Or I'll get serious with my faith, I'm going to follow you, but Jesus, just let me get through the craziness of this new job. Or let me, just give me a little bit more time, I just need 10 more minutes. Listen, and if you are not sure how Jesus feels or thinks about this idea of waiting, read again what he says. He says, let the dead bury their own dead. In other words, he's saying there is no time like the present. What are you waiting for? If you've been exploring and you've been waiting for the right time to get more serious, the question that I would have for you is really simple. Why not now? Later is never going to be the right time when it comes to following Jesus. You may be in a place where you've been following for a long time and you feel like you've been drifting and you're saying to yourself, you know what, there's going to be a time, I'm just going to, just give me a little bit more time and then I'm going to move in. And the question is the same, what about now? Well, the third person says, okay, I'll follow you, but let me first say goodbye to my family, which doesn't sound like an unreasonable request. But Jesus seemed sort of agitated by this response, and he used an analogy about a farmer plowing a field. And Jesus replied, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Here's what he's saying. If you are working, if you have your attention in one direction and you are looking back over your shoulder in another direction, you are not going to be that effective. This man was distracted by his other priorities in life, and this was a problem. And so the question here is, are you prepared to follow Jesus, sacrificing anything that he asks for? Maybe a good question to ask today is, what is distracting you? I'll follow you, Jesus, but just my attention is just on something else right now. I mean, I'm all in with you, but I really got to pay attention to my career right now. Or I'm totally all in with you, right? But I just got to get the scholarship first. When Jesus met a rich young ruler who was following all the rules, this guy was checking all the boxes. He was following the way that people thought that you should follow, and he had all the right answers. Jesus asked him, what's the biggest rule? And he talks about love, and so it was like he was just really nailing it. And if it was a test, he'd be passing with flying colors. But Jesus could see past what everyone else could see. Jesus could see that there was something that was more important to that rich young ruler than anything else. Jesus was able to see that for him it was his money. And you know what Jesus said to him? Yeah, I understand that you want to follow me, but I want to take that. I want to take that one thing that you're sort of covering a little bit. Listen, don't forget that Jesus is not demanding that we give up everything. He's not using his authority to demand this. Instead, he's inviting us to give up what we think is going to make us happy in favor of what actually will. If you think about everything you have in life, if you said, Jesus, I'll give up anything, then what I want you to hear this morning is also pretty simple. Jesus would say, well, what about that? What about that one thing that you hold on to more than anything else? As followers, there is something more than believing, it's following. And if you are prepared to follow Jesus anywhere, if you're prepared to follow Jesus anytime, if you are prepared to sacrifice anything, we begin to move closer to what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. If you grew up in the church, you were likely taught that what Jesus invites us to is to pray a prayer. And what he invites us to is believe, John 3:16. But we're also invited to something more. We're invited to a life of sacrifice, and we're invited to a life fully devoted to God, not only him, but his plans and his will. And when we begin to give our lives completely over to him, we find ourselves actually finding what we're trying to keep. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you that you call us to something big. I thank you that you call us to something big because what we believe is something big. What we believe about you changes absolutely everything. God, forgive us for those times where we sprinkle on this truth about Jesus onto our everyday lives rather than allowing it to be the foundation. Father, I pray that you would remind us of those places in our life that are most difficult for us to share and to bring in our faith. God, help us to be bold. Help us not to avoid those things that desire for self-preservation. God, help us to think about you and to think about what it means to follow. Father, if there are if there's something that's holding us back, if there's a timing issue where we're just not quite ready to move into this, God, I pray that you would just remind us to take steps today, to begin now. And God, if there is anything in our lives that we're holding on to more securely than we're holding on to you, God, help us to loosen our grip. Father, I pray that we as a church would become a place of followers, a group of people who are willing to sacrifice for you, a group of people who are willing to follow you even when it costs us. And God, give us the courage we need, give us the confidence we need, and give us the strength we need so that we can honor you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.